Sorry about the delay. There was, as you can notice, there is no pizza yet.
Yet, and there will be.
Okay,
Don't
so
despair. Hours away.
yeah, so we just there was a confusion. So we start with 2 talks and then break when the pizza comes and come back to that. Even though we know that you don't care about the pizza, it's about the talks. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else? So this is the last one this year. In our Twitter, which is React Edinburgh, we have a poll about what format you prefer, whether it's this lightning talks like today or longer talks or whatever format we've done. So if you could just say what you prefer. And then also we, from next year, will be doing the meetup every 2 months instead of every month because it's been very hard to find talks sometimes and so on. Sway can tell you about Edinburgh JS as well. So we'll start from January and then alternate every 2 months. And hopefully it's going to be here in FabDuel most of the time. Yeah.
It probably will be.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. We start with Scott. First talk.
Yeah.
Go to you. Yes.
Great, so I have to understand. Cool. Hi, I work for a company called Cultivate. It's a consultancy in Codebase around the corner. And for the past year, the client that I've been working on is Deliveroo. I work in a payments team. So I mostly write Ruby. It's like it's all Rails in there basically. In my spare time and when I can find JavaScript work in the payments team, I will grab it as soon as it appears. I also write a little Elixir when I can as well. So I'm going to talk about Flow. Anyone who doesn't know what Flow is, it's going to be like 30 seconds to do that. So Flow is a static typo checker for JavaScript, which means that you annotate your code and then there's a binary that you get from Flow that you throw all your files at it and it will remove all the annotations, so you just get JavaScript back. But when it does that, it will tell you, you pass a string in here and then you start using like a number, that's going to give you an error. It will also give you a lot more protection than that, which you'll kind of see a little later on. It's super similar to TypeScript at this point. They were quite different about a year and a half ago. Now there isn't really all that much between them. The way they're implemented is quite different, and the tooling is a little bit different, but what you actually get from them, it's not really that much different anymore. It's also, it's written in OCaml. TypeScript is written in TypeScript. This one has its a Babel plugin that you'll use for Flow, which is pretty easy to integrate. It's kind of small. It has super good documentation. So there's like a specific section for React stuff, which covers like more than I'm going to go into detail on, like Redux, async stuff in Redux, like refs and event handling, all that kind of stuff. There's really good documentation on it, as well as the fairly complicated and like well-covered type system that it has. Tooling. Basically, you add this in. Most people will have a Babel RC. You add this guy in the middle, Flow, and you npm install a Flow bin package. That's pretty much it. Like Flow in it will give you a Flow config. In this Flow config, you can say only use Flow in this directory, only on these directories. By default, it doesn't cover very much. Cool. So this is something both editors have just now. This is actually a message that's in Atom or in Euclid, which is like a layer on top of Atom, an IDE layer that Facebook has built, which is super useful. It also has like a little debugger panel you can open up and see all your Flow errors and warnings and stuff like that. General type system stuff. Basically, you can alias your types. Here you'd have a coordinate that had a number, but you can basically go as much as you want. It's super useful for things like strings. If you've got magic strings that are passed around, giving them a type makes it super easy when you get an error or you're trying to read the code. When someone's passing in a name, you go, oh, this is a specific type of name, or this whatever. So there's a GitHub repository called under the Flow organization called FlowTyped, which has a load of npm library type definitions that you can pull in, kind of similar to the TypeScript one. If you want to use the TypeScript ones, there's another package. So the TypeScript ones are under definitely typed, and there's a package called Flowgen, which will take a TypeScript definition file and turn it into a Flow one. Super useful. Cool. React stuff. So this basically means you can get rid of prop types, which is great. I love it. Prop types were really frustrating for me to work with. I found like runtime warnings in a console were really not useful as a developer. Like I was building one just write some stuff, write some tests and stuff, and then go and use it. And then when I found like a specific edge case, when I clicked a certain button, did a certain thing, I would get a console warning. And I'm like, I want the warning much earlier, because that might reveal a bug that would take me a much longer time to fix. So yeah, no more prop types. You get a pre-compiled time type checker. So before you've even produced your ES whatever code, you have a bunch of checks from flow. Cool. This is what you'll need to do. So because of the way that ES6 export import works, you need to import everything that was a named export as well as the default export when you import React. So that's what the star as is doing instead. And then you can use, so sometimes people would use a named export for the component part of React when they extend it off of it for a class. But here you would need to use React.component, and then in the square bracket, in the angle bracket, sorry, you have a generic. So the first one in here will be your props object. That can be a type as much as you want. It has to be an object, and you'll see, I'll give you some more complicated examples. And the second argument is the state. So basically these are the two types objects that you give for your props and your state, and Flow will make sure that you follow those. So yeah, if you want to use types, you can import and export them like as if you would import and export functions and objects and things from JavaScript files. Otherwise, you can give it a directory, and it will put all the types in that directory into the global scope, and you can just use them wherever you want. That tends to be what you'll do with type definition stuff when you pull in a package. Cool. So yeah, so here exactly like we have the shape of our state object is maybe like a form wrapper with an array of form errors. So form error could be a type that encapsulates how that error has occurred or whatever. But you may also have a counter for the number of times that they failed in that form or something like that. And you can describe the shape of that above. It's much more, it's much easier to compose this kind of stuff than prop types, which is one thing as well. It's much more easy to, you can use all kinds of things like union types and your generics and stuff, and functions to, so yeah, so for example, prop types just says that you need a function, or you need a function and it's required. That's like all you can do. With Flow, you can say, the thing in my state is actually a function that takes these three things of these three types and it has this return type. And that's like way more useful. Do you have? So yeah, so you get super composable props to state objects that you can use all of the nice stuff in Flow with, and import things from other places and put them into your prop state, into your props type or your state type. And yeah, so it kind of gets to the point where you can build things up, where you might have a label, you might have a point React component. There's nothing in the renders now, just to keep this screenshot small, but it would take in a start position and a label that might be there. So this is like a maybe type with a question mark. And then you have a state which would be the coordinate, would also be a coordinate which would be possibly wherever they drag the point to or wherever it animates to or something like that. Yeah, but you get to be it's much easier to describe the shape of your props using a flow type than it is to use a prop type, which is super for me, and it also warns you much quicker. This also means that you can start to use things like render callbacks or render props or whatever you want to call them, and you can type definition those and get protection against them, which prop types really struggles to do. Yeah, I think that's all I'm talking. I haven't timed it. Are there any questions?
Have you had any experience converting on Flow codebase to Flow codebase?
Yes. So when I first started learning Flow, I had a codebase I wrote in CodeClan, which I attended. It was like a Socket.io multiplayer game. It was roughly 3,000 lines of JavaScript, mostly, almost exclusively untested, and a bit of a mess. It was run like a hackathon, so I put Flow in it. And I ran Flow in the command line, and it gave me about 280 errors that it had inferred from 0 annotations. As I started to add annotations, the errors just went up and up. At the moment, it probably peaked about 350, and I'm down at about 200 right now. But the main benefit, so I went full nuclear on that, and I basically said I want Flow to look at everything in my project. But you can, using the Flow config, there's also a comment that you can put into, so like // and then @flow, and it will tell Flow that it should read through that file. Flow will also warn you when it doesn't know how to infer about something. So when it says I don't know how to cover this, rather than say, like, this is just wrong because I don't know whether this will be right. It will just say, I don't really know. But yeah, I'd say it's pretty easy actually, much easier than I thought it was going to be. Like, yeah.
What does it convert to? I mean, is it just a compile time, or does it keep any defensive mechanism in the final code?
Yeah. So you essentially have the way that I've been using it is through the editor plugin. In Nuclide, Nuclide will, if you open a JavaScript file, it determines that it's watching flows. It will boot up a flow server and watch the files for you. And as you save the file, you'll get underlines and warnings inside your editor. But there's also a binary that you can just run that will look at your flow config, look at the directory, and give you all the warnings in the console about any things that you've broken. It's up to you whether you hook that into your compiler, your compile step or your build step as part of Babel.
There was a very good question on a TypeScript talk earlier in the year. There was, well, if I'm not putting defensive programming in here because I'm relying on this, and I'm exporting then that module, and it doesn't carry any defense, what happens with that, right? So
it entirely depends. Like, so Flow gives you the full ability to just not look at certain directories, like to just exclude certain things or not have definitions for them. It will allow you to just put any types through everywhere, or mixed types or whatever, and you can just sort of use a type checker, but not really have any benefit from it. Yeah, it's unfortunately because it is because it's very easy to integrate. It means that it's very optional, and like you never really get protection like you would in something like Java or whatever. Yeah.
Does it slow down the development process if you have like hot reload or something? You have an extra step before it change?
No, I would say not, and I think that depends on the kind of developer that you are. I tend to, especially as I got more comfortable with React, I would write more code before I even looked at it in the browser. As I started to understand and be able to model with the components and stuff in my head, I would write more code and then it would appear in the browser, and then my flow would be like 20 minutes of fixing all the stuff that I got wrong for whatever. This warns me before I even do that as I write the code. It tells me, like, you know, you've passed the wrong shape of the object here, you've forgotten a key here, that kind of stuff. It's actually faster. So I don't have that. Run this, I'll have the console open and be like, oh, error. Okay, well, where's that error happening? Okay, why is that happening? Like, chasing other things back. I would say it's easier, faster. Yeah.
I usually struggle when identifying the types of props. So basically, like a capitalized or lowercase. So what's the difference between the two? It's like object capitalized, object lowercase.
Do you mean like the definition up here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
in the inside, actually, like label string. So sometimes it's always with a capital S and sometimes lower S. So I don't know.
Okay. So I won't really go into too much in detail here. There's differences between a string type in JavaScript and a string object in JavaScript. But in here, you pretty much just want to use lowercase for any of the types that you have created. So if you have a number, you have a string, you have a boolean, we use lowercase. But any types that you create would start with an uppercase letter. Yeah.
Any way to generate automatically, like a JS DOM, if you share an npm module with Flow to make documentation automatically for the people? So you can have actually like the type directly inside like that.
Do you mean like exposing definitions for a library that you've written? Is it easy to
for a module I've written to share directly what type you use for people?
So in terms of documentation,
to replace JS DOM and not have a call for that.
Oh, I'm not actually sure. I've never used really much JavaScript documentation, unfortunately. Well, I don't know, maybe fortunately. Yeah, most of the stuff I've written is, I guess, the only thing that you can, so yeah, to expose the types, if in a library that you've written, to give someone else the types, you would need to either find some really strange way of getting them into the Flow repository itself. So a bunch of the browser stuff is in there, and otherwise you would get them into the Flow types repository, and people can pull them in like that.
Okay, so we have to use Flow also to get the benefits.
Yeah.
Outside of your own work.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
There we go, great. Okay, hi everyone. I've definitely got the John the short straw here. The pizza's here. I'm ever so sorry. I'll try and keep this really quick. Hopefully it'll be quite an interesting little talk. I'm going to talk about React Native for web and specifically kind of sharing code across platform. And we've tried to do this. There's a few lessons we've learned. So without further ado, let's crack on. So so what's React Native first of all? Let's just get that common understanding. So React Native is where we write JavaScript or React with a kind of strange React Native JSX syntax. So we use views instead of divs and things like that, and that will then compose that to native components. So for example, we'll take a view and it will convert it to the equivalents in Android or in iOS, right? So that's React Native. And just for a bit of context, we found ourselves about a year ago with an app just written in iOS, needing to convert that to web and to do it fast, ideally, because there's a client deadline and things. So React Native for web is one of the options that we looked at, and this is a very similar slide. It's exactly the same basically, except that after you've put in your views or your touchable opacities or whatever, as well as converting it to the Android equivalent, the Apple equivalent, it also converts it back to a div. Okay, back to the web equivalent. Now there tend to be two schools of thought about this, right? And it caused a lot of debate in our office at the time, didn't it, Dean? So the first school of thought, let's call them Team A, is it sounds a bit dodgy. It sounds a bit sketchy. You know, we're using React Native, so a native version of our web framework, and then we're converting it back to the web. So we're kind of going full circle. That doesn't sound quite right to me. The other argument, Team B, would say, oh, that sounds fantastic. We've written once, we're running on multiple platforms. You know, React is meant to be cross-platform. We're meant to be able to plug in different renderers. So if I just get a bit of a show of hands, so Team A being sounds dodgy, Team B seeing quite won't go anywhere, fantastic. Who would say they would fall on the Team A side of that? And then the Team B. That's actually quite an even split. That worked incredibly well, fantastic. So I'll sort of tell you. So I was definitely a Team B at the start. I thought, great. I mean, this saves us loads of time. So there are definitely benefits to it. We found when we started using it. It meant we were able to prototype a product super quick and start getting a little bit of early user testing done really quick. And it also meant we were able to scaffold our application end to end. So and that meant that different developers could kind of work on different bits of the workflow. So I could look at the checkout, and someone else could look at the login, for example. So that kind of works really well. So there definitely are some benefits, but is it production ready? I mean, I think on balance, like probably not. And I couldn't find much evidence of people using it in production, just from a quick Google. We do, but in a kind of limited way that I'll explain. So some of the problems are styles are a bit flaky. I kind of issues with Flex. We couldn't quite work out what it was, but it's just a bit flaky. And media queries and pseudo selectors aren't supported out of the box too. It's caused quite a few compatibility issues. We wouldn't be able to upgrade to React 16 for quite a while because of it, because it only supported like an older version of React. So that causes a bit of a headache. I think they've now sorted that out with a couple of remaining issues. And this is probably the biggest problem. We have to maybe accept suboptimal design. So we have to do things like this if we're on the web, tweak the styling. And this is another problem. Yeah, it's really difficult to Google the error messages. If you think about React Native for web, it's difficult to get something specific about React Native for web. So that's actually a really big problem in practice. So the reason I think maybe no one's using it in prod is I think there's a better way. I think the way to do this is just to rewrite your components and only your components into plain HTML. It's a straightforward job, a bit of a laborious job, but it's straightforward, and you end up with a much better design. And we can do this clever thing to piggyback on this React Native cross-platform extensions, which is where you put an iOS or a .android in your file. React Native knows which one to use for iOS or Android, but if you just don't put anything, a little hack, a Webpack will just evaluate to that, to just button.js without an extension. So that worked quite well. And kind of stuff around that, just a few little tips. So we need to plan, not for cross-platform compatibility, because that's not really what we're talking about, but we need to plan for cross-platform migration from the start of the project. And key to that is extracting as much application logic as possible from components into something else. So by that I'm talking about all that stuff that comes before your render method, but after your component will mount. All those kind of helper methods, some people call them. You want to have kind of as little of that as possible, really, because you end up copying and pasting it to your web version and your app version. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And this is really critical. If you're using React Native for web for prototyping, but you're not planning to use it in production, get rid of it completely. Don't leave any traces of it. Totally nuke it from your repo after you're done with it. Because if you leave it in at all, it then causes all those compatibility issues that I spoke about before, stopping you upgrade to React 16. So Pete's over here in a minute. We're going to do some code, but not in any meaningful. Just a quick look. No children were harmed in the making of this presentation. So this is what I was talking about before. This is one of the component from our code base. I'm allowed to slag this off because I wrote most of it, so it's okay. But after our component did mount, we've got all these. I'm just zooming a bit there. We've got all these kind of helper methods here, updating the scale, doing this, that, and the other. All these helper methods before we get to our render method, and that's a problem because if you want to have two separate files, one for web, one for app, it becomes a real pain to copy and paste this, and you'll probably end up with issues as part of that. So ideally, you want to have all of that encapsulated in, as I said, something else. That can maybe be Redux actions and reducers, or it can be vanilla JavaScript, like app business logic way you've written. It doesn't really matter, as long as you kind of keep it away from components, would be my tip. And the other thing, this is what you end up with in the DOM as well, these styles. It's kind of okay, it's not the end of the world, but it's not very pretty, is it now? So that's just another thing to be aware of. So little summary, I think React Native for web is a great tool for prototyping and early stage UI testing. I think for that purpose, I think it works really well. I think the whole might want to debug run anywhere. We've kind of heard it before, right? And I think even if that is a good idea in principle, I'd argue that maybe the UI layer isn't maybe the best place to do that. Right, want to run anywhere because you want subtle variations in your view layer to make it feel native on whatever platform you're running. To accommodate for different user behaviours and things like that. So maybe it's a bit of a work in progress, but in the meantime, let's just make sure we're separating out application logic from our components, and the world will be a happier place. So that's it. Sorry to keep you from Peter. Thank you. Really quick questions. Didn't think so. Oh, sorry, this one. Yeah. Sorry.
Use it midway, because the only thing in my mind about React Native and web is styling, CSS. Can I use it to just get CSS out of my React Native styles, for example?
Yeah, you can do, but I think you then tend to. What we found is we kind of ran into the sort of problems around. So it doesn't support media queries. You then need an additional library for that. It doesn't support those. Is it the hover and that kind of thing? Is that pseudo? Yeah, it doesn't support them, and so you end up kind of installing additional repos, additional npm modules to kind of accommodate that. And the other thing is you find yourself having to tweak styles anyway to get it to work on web. Because of that, we kind of found that we were rewriting it anyway. We were actually moving into a new component. Sometimes kind of changing the structure of the component, but we're often not just changing the style. We didn't actually find there was kind of a huge amount of value in that. Just from our experience.
Do you think it's something that might be improving in terms of support and get used more, or is just?
Yeah, I did actually. I did a little bit of analysis on this, and I didn't show it in the presentation because I think GitHub Start is a bit of a cynical way of assessing an open source project. But it is kind of whereas React's kind of going like that. React Native for Web's kind of taken off a little bit, and it is interesting that it's been kicking about for probably a couple of years now. But like I said, I couldn't find any obvious big hits using it in production. And if anyone knows anyone, I'd be really interested. But I wasn't able to find anything easily. So it's certainly not kind of growing exponentially, and it kind of feels like maybe it's steady mobile or tailing off slightly, which is the sense I got. It's a very well maintained project. You know, there's not too many issues. Quite an active community around it, but I maybe don't think the usage has grown in quite the way I might have thought it would have a couple of years ago. Let's wait some pizza then. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Guys, yeah, I mean the last bit of a lightning talk, we normally always bug you with it at the start, is about Code Your Future. So, I mean, Code Your Future is coding school for refugees. Few of us here are mentors there. Few of us help and come. Like there are a couple of people who are involved in the school, and we are always looking for more volunteers, more people to help. Not just to come to classes in Glasgow. You don't need to come to Glasgow. You can help online. There are people like Paige here. Michael offered two of our students came and spent a day at MRM at his company. Small things like that will be great if you can do. We're talking about 4 students every 6 months. I'm pretty sure that Scotland tech market can take 4 students, or at least give them a chance. Just be open about the idea that maybe they are good. So even if on a personal level you talk to your companies, or even better, if you are the one making the decision, just give them a chance either for an interview or for shadowing a developer like MRM did for a day. Just you can follow us online. You can see our Twitter. There are so many ways of getting involved. And our group also runs this meetup on Glasgow JavaScript. So that as well would be a good way to get help. Hopefully check it out and just help us make it continue next year.
Yeah, the first class is graduating now. I mean, there's some really good talents there, so make sure if you're hiring entry-level developers, have a think.
Yeah, cool. Cheers.
Hope you guys enjoyed it.